In this program today, we have a very special interview with Darius Ramadesh, who survived the Iranian Revolution. And this is his remarkable story. Darius, warm welcome to this home edition of the Middle East Report.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And Darius, you've got a remarkable story to tell from your book, which is Escape from Iran. And
right.
You experienced the horrors of the Iranian Revolution firsthand. But before we talk about your experience living in Iran and trying to escape the evil regime of these Iranian mullahs, can you share where your story began? Because your mother's American and your father's Iranian. So can you share with us how they met and something about the background of your parents?
Basically, my father was attending what was at the time an MSU, Northeast State University, but is now today Truman State University. And my mother was a local farm girl there. She was attending there as well. And they met. And well, one thing led to another. They got married. And my dad started working for a company called, initially for a company called the steel mill plant called Zubahan in the Isfahan province. And then, but then after about a year or two, he received an offer to work for DuPont. And so we packed up basically, went back to America, and my dad started his training with DuPont. And basically they told him, they asked him to represent their interests in Iran because at the time, the Shah of Iran, the regime prior to the current situation, wanted to build an American company, a sister company of DuPont in Iran called Polyacryl. And so, my dad was sent there on behalf of DuPont to represent their interests in Iran to start up this company. And of course, we went. And this was the later part of '78. And then, that's when everything started. And one day we wake up and we see people out in the streets, down with the Shah, down with America, America's big devil and Satan and whatever, And so then we, my mother, of course, would plead with my father, come on, we got to get out of here. Things are not good. All our American friends are leaving. However, my father was, I think, a little in denial about the fact that the Shah's time is finally coming to an end, and that, so so it happened, and of course, we actually watched the hostage taking of the American personnel, the American embassy on television, and and at that point, my dad said, "Okay, I think it's time to go." But then the following day, they came in, they broke the door down, came in, held us at gunpoint, and said that. You ain't going nowhere.
Yeah. So, Darius, can you share with us your first memories of living in Iran under the Shah, what it was like, and what your life was like before the Islamic Revolution that took hold of the country in '79?
Well, from what I can recall, and I have a pretty good memory from that time. It was just like being in France, Italy, England or America or anywhere like that. It was free. You had people walking about, women, however they wanted to dress. It was basically being like in Hawaii. It was, of course, after '79, all that came to an end. And Syria.
You'd have been about 10. Am I correct? At the
about
time
10 o'clock. I was 10 years old. That is
10
correct.
years old during the time of the revolution, and from what you've sent me, it must have been absolutely horrific. Describe what you saw in the streets as the Islamic Revolution took hold, and no one actually thought that we know the Shah fled Iran, but no one actually thought that the Iranian armed forces would actually fall so quickly.
That's the thing. What we saw transpire in 1979 was not a revolution, contrary to the near half a century narrative rhetoric that we hear, that's being publicized via various media networks all over the world. It was, in fact, an occupation. There were many elements involved that made the 79 catastrophe to be able to be a success, as it was. What we saw transpire in Iran in 1979 was effectively not a revolution, because, like I said, a revolution implies a grassroots movement, a popular movement enacted by the majority of a people of a society. However, what we saw transpire in Iran that in 79 was in fact a movement of the extreme minority element, a minor element within the Iranian society over the greater majority by means of violence, force, and intimidation imposed. And I actually saw this with my own eyes many times where you'd have these people demonstrating in the banners, with their banners and whatnot. And many people tried to intervene and stop it, but they were threatened by the armed element of the occupation of the events. And they threatened people basically, stay in your homes, do not try to intervene, otherwise you and your families will be, basically they threatened them. And so they were, by these means, able to make the 79 occupations, happen, to become successful. Like I said, I saw this with my own eyes, so this isn't me speculating or hearsay. I actually saw this happen. And I recall my mother speaking to my father about it many times, and he was explaining to her what was happening, and she didn't understand nothing, about what was going on. And so, yeah. And as far as army goes, again, there were foreign elements involved. I'm not going to get into any specifics, but there were some foreign elements involved that had beforehand intervened to make sure that the Shah's army, I think it was like 1 million soldiers, 1 million strong, not to intervene and to make sure that the proceedings would succeed.
And Darius, how would your mother be feeling, particularly much as she's an American living in Iran during the time of the revolution, or as you explained, this kind of almost a planned coup d'etat against the Shah. So how was your mum feeling at this time, and your dad feeling, knowing that the Iran that you knew had completely gone now, and now we have the first Islamist takeover of a nation?
My mother naturally was terrified. She'd never experienced anything like this before in her life. In fact, it was even alien to my father. I mean, he grew up, in Iran under the Shah, and he went to school in the United States. And so even to him, this was alien, She was terrified. And my dad he was absolutely just overwhelmed. He didn't know what to make of anything. So yeah, the feeling collectively between with both of my parents was complete, well, horror, uncertainty, you name it.
Describe what you saw with your own eyes as the Shiite Iranian forces took to the streets, and just describe for us the situation that you encountered personally, and also witnessed yourself.
Right. Well, yeah, what they showed on TV, they basically have people walking around with their banners, down with the Shah, Madhya Shah, they call it. They say it in Farsi. And there was Shah, of course, the Shah's forces were about, they were following the protest of the people. And yeah, but I never actually saw any aggression exercised by the Shah's forces against the people. I mean, this is something that's, I never saw that happen, actually. So I couldn't comment on that area. But I will say that there's another, I think, important point, is that this minor element that I spoke about with regards to these movements, this comprised about 80 to 90% of various leftist, Marxist, Islamist groups in Iran at the time, such as the Mujahideen Akhab, such as the Tudeh, such as the Fadain. There were various groups who all merged and with the mullahs got together, and they, made this happen. And of course, there's no, it's not, you could go online, you can look, there's plenty of photos showing these various groups with their banners, so it's common knowledge that they were all involved with this. Yeah.
Why did you think that your father wanted to stay a little bit longer, thinking that that the Shah's army in particular could actually push back the Islamist forces and still maintain control of the country?
Right.
Was that the primary reason why he decided to remain in Iran despite the uprising that we saw?
Absolutely. That was one of them. The other factor was the United States. He believed that America would never allow something like this, and that this is just a little skirmish, little, small groups blowing some steam, basically, and that eventually would come to an end, and that everything would go back to normal. But of course, as we know, history has shown that was not the case. So.
And also talk through the plight of the Americans that were taken hostage at the American embassy in Tehran, and how that would have kind of brought fear amongst any Westerners still left in the country, including your family.
We saw it on TV, the following day after that event, and that right there pretty much was a red light to my mother. Her being an American, and we all felt a lot, great deal of fear, a lot of anxiety. Of course, that didn't help when they broke the door down and came in with AK-47s. That pretty much, my mother said, "Oh boy, here we go. Yeah, it's our turn."
So describe your memories then of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard forces coming in to invade your home, and what that experience was like, and the impact it had on you and the rest of the family.
Terrifying, absolutely terrifying. I was just a kid, 10 years old. I couldn't appreciate or understand the political magnitude of what was going on, but I knew, guys coming in with aggression, yelling with guns, that this was not a good thing. And of course, my mom, she was very under a great deal of stress. She was distressed and she was crying, and it wasn't very good.
Darius, share with us the American school that you went to, and what that was like, and how then you were forced to attend an Iranian institute, which would have clearly been a Islamist Shiite school.
It became an institution of indoctrination, basically. That's all it was. In Iran, and I'm sure it is with other such totalitarian, ideologically totalitarian, theologically totalitarian places. It's the same thing, basically. It's all indoctrination. So it was a huge contrast. I went to the American school. You learn your ABCDs and your whatnots, and then you go to the other one, and they're talking about dying for the revolution, and dying for this, and dying for that, and killing for that. It's a big contrast. And
and Darius, share the story of where some young boys around your own age that were part of the Basiji, which was the internal police force or militia on behalf of the regime, and how they tried to accuse you in particular of false accusations against the new supreme leader of Iran.
There's about 4 or 5 of them. Yeah, I was picked on all the time, mainly because I would not conform to the. I was very rebellious. I think I took that from my mother. So they were always picking on me in the corridors, outside of the playgrounds, or anywhere else. And of course, everybody knew that we were essentially in a house arrest, and that my presence in the school was forced by the regime. So, although there was most of the kids who did not treat me in this way, there were that small element that were associated with the new establishment, with the occupation, as it were. And so on that particular day, I remember I was walking home. I just left school and minding my own business, as I always did. I was looking down. I didn't want to, and these guys approached me, these boys, and they started mocking me, calling me names, American, this and that, spit at me or whatnot. And then one of the boys looks up and says, "Oh, look, Mr. what are these coming, and he was actually a member of the Revolutionary Guards, this Maradi guy, and he wasn't a principal. I know in the autobiography I sent you, I think it said principal. He wasn't a principal. He was actually a member of the Revolutionary Guards. And he came and he had his Colt, 45 or whatever, strapped to his side. And he came and they said, yeah, Mr. Adnan, this and that, same and that. And he gave me a real stern look, but surprisingly to me, for me, he started to turn around, started slapping the kids around. And he said, you're lying because Mr. Adnan would never do that, which shocked the absolute. I mean, I was blown over. I couldn't believe it. And because in part, mostly because I never bothered anybody. I wasn't a troublemaker. I kept myself to myself, kept my head down. I came very close. If it would have been anybody else, another member of the guards that didn't know me or whatever, I could easily been executed right there, easily, no problem.
And can you share with us how you were indoctrinated, or they attempted to indoctrinate you with the Islamic Revolution and the ideas of the Islamic Revolution?
Well, it's basically, this repetitive, chantings and lessons and all the typical propaganda, and making you march, during recess, and stuff like that, very common. What you see in China or anywhere else, it's just common. Yeah.
Darius, describe what happened when the Iran-Iraq war started, because you describe in your the biography that you sent me that sirens went off and the whole situation wasn't the same again as the town that you were living in was bombed by Saddam Hussein's regime in Iraq.
Yes, this was 1980, and I was actually out playing football or soccer with some friends, and we started hearing the sirens going off. And we're all looking around, like, what the heck's going on here, And so we all ran home, and when we got to the alley, where we were, everybody had come out in the alley, and my mother was out in the alley with all the other women, mothers. They were crying and worried, not knowing what's going on. Of course, over the loudspeaker, they announced that Iraq had crossed over into Iran, and that was the beginning of the what would become the 9-year Iran-Iraq War.
And probably a little known fact that many of our viewers watching this home edition of the Middle East Report might not understand. I certainly didn't know that until doing this program, that Saddam Hussein used biological and chemical weapons against the Iranian people. Can you describe what that was like and living under those conditions?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I think we all know about what he did against the Kurds. I mean, mustard gas. There's pictures of what he did in, I think it's called Halabja, where that was the Kurdish area, where they came in and they used mustard gas, and they did that to a lot of the villages near the Iranian border. However, what they did in terms of biological chemical weapons against the people actually inside of Iran, to my recollection, no bombs were dropped to that effect in the cities. However, what he would do is they would drop these chemical bombs around crop areas, water reservoirs, cattle fields. And then what would happen is these cattle would eat the grass. And then these chemicals, these biological agents would then enter the animals, the crops, the water supplies. And then these would in turn would make their way over to the cities. People would consume these, and they start developing all these different illnesses, all these different conditions and results. Yeah. And my sister was one of them, actually.
Now, you talk about how being at this school that you couldn't cope with it anymore, that you had enough of the bullying, the indoctrination by this new Shiite Islamist revolution that has taken over the country. What were the consequences of you dropping out of school, Darius?
Of course, my situation was much different, more severe, I think, than most your average kid because of our situation. We were in house arrest. My father was not very good terms with the new setup. the new status quo, basically. But it was law that boys between certain ages, if they weren't attending school, that they would then be forced to immediately go to the front and fight in the Iran-Iraq War. In fact, they even gave us cards, school cards, so that all kids who attended school you'd have checkpoints in the city or whatnot, at the four ways, the roundabouts, I think, or squares, and all those places. And they would say, "Show us your card." These were members of the Revolutionary Guards or Basij. And if this student, the boy, didn't have a card to show, an updated card, then he would be pulled out of the car, thrown back of a pickup truck, and taken to the front immediately. And so when I was thrown out, my father immediately went into severe panic. He started to really, because he knew what it meant. And there's no point even trying to stay at home and just don't be seen in public, because they have your name on record and they know you're not attending school. They're gonna come to your house looking for you. So it doesn't, so it was very, very frightening.
I'd also share the horrendous experience that you actually faced working in a factory. And then it was hit by one of Saddam's missiles, and many of your fellow workers there died in that instance. Share with us what that was like, because that must have been horrific for you.
Yes, it was. It was actually it was an area raid by a Iraqi MiG-29. Yeah, and what happened that day was I was actually in a my father had a friend who owned a small steel mill plant, a little machinist shop or factory, and it was actually right next to the weapons factory in a city called Shah, or an English translation would be City of Falcons, I think. And so this is a small industrial town, and I was working there that day. My boss was actually teaching me how to do some work on a lathe machine. And this lathe machine was massive. I mean, it was huge. And so much so I actually had to stand on a footstool to be able to reach the chalk, the vise on the big thing, the machine. And I was, laying down, and he was showing me. And then all of a sudden we heard a sound, and it sounded like a jet. And my boss immediately stood up, and said, "Oh my God, it's an air raid." And I kind of joked. I looked at him, and I said, "No, it's just a passenger plane." Immediately, as soon as I said that, the roof of the ceiling was entirely made of windows, glass. A dark shadow came over the shop, and immediately, basically, he broke the sound barrier. It was a jet, MiG-29, over the shop, our shop, and all the glass, anything glass in the shop went. It was like shrapnel, went flying everywhere. Guys got cut in the face, whatnot. I was thrown off this stand, and I fell between two boxes of machine parts, cut my side open really bad. My white shirt was drenched in blood. And so, yeah, I ran outside, and I remember about guys running around, then of course the MiGs came around. I turned around, looked, and I actually mentioned this in my book as well. I turned around and looked over, and you could see there was a desert in front of us, and you could see the oil refinery way, way in the distance. Two MiGs that I saw went straight for the oil refinery. Each one shot several rockets, went straight up in the air. The oil refinery just was engulfed in flame instantly. And I think they said like 3,000 or 4,000. I think 4,000 workers died instantly. Then, of course, they came back around. They started firing at all the buildings and everything in the area with cannon. And at that moment, the weapons factory, which was right next door to us, the anti-aircraft batteries started going off, and the ground started shaking. And so, yeah, it was absolute mayhem. It was terrifying. Absolutely. I was about 14, I think, 15.
And you also described how you were kidnapped after this by the Iranian Revolutionary Guards and sent to the front line in the war against Iraq. Share with us how the Iranian Revolutionary Guards captured you, and did you fear for your life at that stage?
Absolutely, terrified. I was actually out in the alleyway playing a couple of roads down, playing with some friends. We were playing football, and I was actually getting ready to make a goal, and I was running towards the goal. I look over and I see all my friends are running in different directions. One of the boys shouts, Hezbollah, Hezbollah. And I turn around, this guy grabs me in the back of the neck, drags me kicking, he throws me back in the pickup truck, and off we go. And the tragic, and of course the whole thing was tragic, but one of the things of it, irony of it, was that my father was actually in the process of arranging to have me smuggled out of the country at that point when this happened, and which of course never materialized at that point. I was taken away for 3 months, and I was forced to fight in the war, and thanks to the Iranian major who basically took pity on me, I was able to get away, and I went into hiding for about 1 year up in the mountains and the deserts with the nomads and whatnot, until everything was finalized, and I was then smuggled out of the country.
I mean, share with us what you saw on this battlefield, because we know that the Iranian regime developed the whole concept of the suicide bombers.
Right.
They gave children as young as 12 years and younger a key, and were told to be martyrs, and they're told to walk across the front lines where the Iraqi mines were, and die on behalf of the cause. And then they were celebrated that they would receive, the Heavens Award as being martyrs for the Islamic Revolution. So share with us your experience, if you saw anything like that, or you're involved in anything like that.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. That is absolutely correct. They had these little keys, and it said "Made in China" on them, little gold keys. And they would give these keys to these kids, and they would say, "Now, when you go over there, you have to run in that direction. Then make sure you don't lose your key, because if you lose your key, you can't make it into heaven." And so these kids would hold on to these keys, and they would say, "Now, run in that direction." And the kids would go, and all you could hear is just absolutely. In fact, the experience that I had with this, on this one occasion, not one Iraqi fired a single bullet at the kids that were coming. They were so shocked. When the whole thing was finally over with, it was absolute silence. No Iraqis were, you could hear no Iraqi guns being, I think they were absolutely in shock. Even they were horrified. They couldn't believe it because of the carnage on children. I mean, it was so severe. Yeah.
So what were you thinking at the time? Obviously, you would have been a kind of teenager then. Do you thinking that you're going to survive this?
No, my thoughts were, I'm not going to get out of here. I'm done. Yeah. There was no way I thought I was going to get out of there. That was not going to happen.
And how were you treated by the Iranian military or the Iranian Revolutionary Guards?
Oh, not very good. I mean, for obvious reasons, being an American. And of course, after I went into hiding, word got to the family that I was never meant to get away alive, that I was supposed to be made an example of as a foreigner, a Westerner who has volunteered to basically die for the cause. And but like I said, this Iranian major took pity on me, and so because of him and the grace of God, that didn't happen.
So share the story how your mother, Linda, and also your sister as well, managed to escape Iran, pretty much through the help of the US State Department and also the help of the Swiss embassy in Tehran.
Right. Yeah, my sister contracted a very dangerous biological illness in result of, as I pointed out, these biological agents that Saddam was using against Iranian cities. But also, what happened with me was I was in hiding at the time when this happened. My sister became ill. The doctors in Iran basically told my dad that she wasn't going to live. She had a couple of weeks to live. And so my father, this prompted my father to finally take the drastic measures of reaching out in any way he could to try to arrange my sister and my mother to be smuggled out. And so, because basically what happened was, the deal was, if we tried to flee the country, if we tried to do anything like that, all bets are off. We'd all basically end up against the wall, and that'd be the end of that. So, hence why up to that point, my father never made any attempts of trying to escape. But at that point, it was basically die or die. We had nothing to lose really. My sister was going to die. I was in trouble. So, he figured, okay. So through contacts, friends, whatnot, we were able to reach my grandfather, my late grandfather, God bless his soul. He's passed away now, Charles McKim, in Kirksville, Missouri. And through him, then we were able to get the message to the Department of State and tell them our situation. And they contacted, yes, the branch within the Swiss embassy at the time, and we were able to make the arrangements. And my mother and little sister was able to flee, and of course I went via Persian Gulf on a boat and taken to Dubai, and after about a week or two, compliments, guest of Uncle Sam there with the U.S. consulate that was then sent back home to America. So yeah.
So I mean, firstly, I mean, it's a remarkable story. How did you get to the mountains, and how did is it the Kashkari
Oh, the
nomads?
Kashkari, yeah,
Kashkari nomads protect you, and what were they like? Because clearly
fantastic people.
They would have put their own lives on the line, wouldn't they, to have looked after you? And knowing that you were missing as well, that the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, you almost had a price tag on your head, didn't you? Being an American teenager, and you've just escaped from the army, and they're after you. So just share with us your experience of living with them in the mountains for a year. Were you living in fear? Did you have any episodes with the Iranian Revolutionary Guards? Share that with us.
Right. Well, first of all, they are remarkable people. All those nomads in Iran, those people are absolutely wonderful people. Very selfless, and they're always doing whatever they can to help anybody that they can. And so incredible, outstanding people. And so, yeah, there was one instance when I was actually, I was initially taken to my one of my uncle's villas, and I was in hiding there. And then one day there was some patrols, and it was supposed to have been completely isolated and secluded, But as one day, it was a patrol car came by, and they were looking around, and they started asking some questions. One of the guys that was with me, he went out and talked to him, and he said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "I'm the keeper of the place. I'm just kind of." And so they left. And then I remember he came in and told me, "Okay, I think we need to get out of here. This place is no longer safe." I don't know if he bought my story or not. They might come back with more people. So we got the heck out of there. And we went, yeah. So then I went and stayed in some little mud hut somewhere for the rest of the time until the word came. And then they stuck me in the trunk of a car. And I was then taken to, wherever, to board the ship. So,
what's the ship like?
The ship was, well, initially, what it was, it was a cargo ship, a small cargo ship, but big enough, and it was in the middle of the Persian Gulf, and it was going, it wasn't waiting for us, and so we had to initially board this speedboat. It had 4 motors on it. And basically, we got on that boat, and it spun away from the shoreline, and it took us out in the middle of the Persian Gulf, basically, to meet up with the ship. And like I said, the ship wasn't stopped; it just kept going. And it was starting to get dark, and the guy said, "Look, they're going to throw a rope, knotted rope, like not a ladder, but a rope, with knots on it, and you're going to have to grab a hold of this rope and climb." We're talking about, 2 stories. Oh. And yeah, and he said, "Now the ship can't stop. It's going while we're doing this." So he said we got a distance about, I don't know, a couple of feet or so between the boat and the ship, because if we get too close, the ship current will pull the boat under. So we have to stay a little bit. So you got to grab a hold of this rope and climb. If you fall in, there's nothing we can do. You'll be sucked under, and that's it. You're gone. So with this in mind, 17-year-old kid, I grabbed the whole of this rope and started to ascend. And that's how I got on the ship. The ship itself was very dirty. It was, a lot of slime, of course, smell of fish, stuff like that. And of course, at one point, they stuck us down at the bottom of this container area, and they told us, be very quiet, we're getting close to the Iran international waters. And at this point, most likely we're going to have Revolutionary Guard patrols come on, and they're going to search everywhere. So make sure whatever you do, you don't make no noise, because if you make the slightest sound, what they do is they use stethoscopes and they listen. And if they hear a breathing, if they hear a cough, a sneeze, movement, whatever, that's it. He said, all of you will be executed, thrown overboard with the captain, and the ship will be sunk to the bottom of the sea. And no one will ever know what happened to you. So be quiet. And so that's what we did. And sure enough, about an hour or two later, they came on board. We could hear them, and yeah, they were pounding inside, trying to find hollow areas that there could be potentially stowaways and people of that nature.
So quite an incredible, miraculous escape there.
Yes. I mean, I've always been a prayer kind of guy, but on that day, I became more religious than I'd ever been in my life. And I've always been religious, but on that day, I became.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. So, what was it like then when you finally got to Dubai? I mean, this year was 1987. So, what was it like when you finally got to Dubai, that you were free from the Islamic regime in Iran, and that you tasted freedom?
Well, that was I can't put words to it. The feeling of freedom. Never mind seeing nightclubs everywhere, something I hadn't seen since I was, about that high, but just to know I can be who I want to be, dress as I like, say what I like, and I'm not going to be lined up against the wall. I think that for me was intoxicating. I had known something like that since I was 10-year-old kid, 9-year-old kid, I mean, it was intoxicating.
So where was your father during all of this?
Well, he was the last to leave. He made sure my mother and my little sister got out, made sure I got out. In fact, while we were moving away from the shoreline there with the speedboat, he was waving at me goodbye, and I looked back at him, and he was just standing there helpless, and just waving, until I disappeared the distance. And then he made preparations, and he was able to leave or whatever. Yeah. So,
and how did your father escape? So it's not easy leaving.
No. He went through Turkey. That's my understanding. He went to Turkey and took that route. And being married to an American, he wasn't an American citizen, but he was married to an American, and so he was able to work things out and get back to the States.
So share with us what it was like then to meet your mother again, Linda, and your sister, and to arrive back in the States in Missouri.
Oh, what it felt like.
Yeah. Well, just share with us that incredible moment it would have been to be reunited with your mother again.
That was, I felt great in Dubai. But when I landed in St. Louis Airport and Missouri, and I got out, and I mentioned this in my other interview as well, it was, I just dropped to my knees, and I was just, sobbing, and it was then that I heard my mother, and she came and went over to me. We embraced, and she was just, I'm sorry that I left you, and because she had to. If she didn't, my sister would have died. And so it was incredible. My mother, she was a wonderful, wonderful person, and she and I was exceptionally close. My whole life, my mother was my, center of my world, basically. So yeah, it was very, very emotional.
And what was life like growing up in the States, and how did you kind of deal with emotional trauma that you went through in your early teenage years with the onset of the Islamic Revolution, and what you experienced and what you saw, and then to know that you're kind of in the land of the free, as it were, where no one's going to attack you, no one's going to persecute you, you don't have that
Right.
fear of your lives, and then trying to readjust to what is a sense of normality, I guess.
Right. It was, yes. The transition took a very long time. I'd say the better part of 10 years.
Wow.
The adjustment. I mean, a lot of people tell you, oh, we escaped from such country, and we, oh, everything was great and everything. That's at face value. What goes on inside is something that it takes a very long time. It's a bleeding wound. It never really heals. What you learn how to do is just adjust and to live with it, but it never heals. You don't ever get over it. In fact, I have a Baha'i friend, Baha'i gentleman, who was tortured during that time, after the '79 catastrophe, as it were, the occupation. And this gentleman, to this very day, suffers from extreme severe migraines, not because it's a physical issue, but emotionally. And he was actually a lawyer for the IRS for a while, so a very intelligent man, very educated. But emotionally, it destroyed him so bad that outwardly fantastic person, jolly, happy, enjoying his life in America and everything else, loves his family, but on the inside, there's a raging storm goes on that never goes away. And it's the same thing with me as well. People may not see it at face value. They look at you and, oh, he's doing great, he's laughing at it. But on the inside, you have a bleeding wound. The scars never, ever heal. So the first 10 years after my escape and return to America, actually, the first year, I refrained from a lot of socializing. I stayed predominantly in the house with my shades closed, curtains closed. I shied away from any kind of situation, environment that had noise. Like, for example, the first night, I'll never forget this. My first night home, I was staying with my grandfather. This is after they picked me up at the airport. And that night, there was a severe storm, which Missouri is known for it. And I was asleep, and the thunder happened, it started to thunder. And I immediately jumped out of my sleep. In my sleep, I went, threw myself under my grandfather's table with my hands over my head. I would start to shake because of I thought it was an air raid. And my mother came, she grabbed me and she started embracing me, and she started rubbing my hair and said, "It's okay, you're out. It's over, you're gone. You're not there anymore." So that's what I went through for the first, year. And then gradually I started becoming more and more desensitized to sounds, and more started to adjust and adapt. And so now we are, well, where I am now, which is now I can hear a sound or whatever. It's no big deal, of course. But that was the that was the adjustment process. That was
So Darius, share with us what you're doing with your life now, because you are campaigning on behalf of human rights in Iran. You are defending women's rights in Iran. You love the Jewish state, the state of Israel, which
Absolutely.
we know that this Iranian regime
Absolutely
has said on so many occasions that their desire is to wipe Israel off the face of the earth, to destroy Israel.
Sure.
And of course, your own personal experience, how evil and vile this Iranian regime is.
Right.
So what message do you have to kind of Western leaders to wake up and realize who they're actually dealing with? Because we get the impression, whether it's the British Foreign Office or the US State Department, or whether it's this awful Democrats that are holding power in the White House, I don't think have any real understanding of who these people are.
When you look at the world leadership, I don't care who it is. I don't care if it's the White House. I don't care if it's Buckingham Palace. I don't care if it's and how they approach and how they're wishing to deal with the current situation there. what you're seeing is a repetition, resurrection or repeating of what happened with Neville Chamberlain, and they're dealing with that demon Adolf Hitler. And it's basically a very, and of course, in some aspects, I don't blame them. And the reason I say this is because they're Westerners. You know, they live in a social environment, moral environment where, you know, human rights, democracy, freedom, social progress, social whatever. These are the predominant views and aspirations within the societies that they've basically been born and raised and lived in their whole life. So, but what they don't understand is when you're dealing with certain types of ideologies, certain types of totalitarian ideologies, these approaches don't work. And I say this all the time: evil, the character evil will not change simply because you've jotted down a few lines on a piece of paper. Okay, evil is evil, inequity is inequity, and it aspires to achieve only one objective, its own objectives, and it will seize at nothing to achieve it. What you might get is a little bit of a delay or a little postponement, but inevitably, what's going to happen at the end of the day, it will strive until it achieves its goal. And so, my advice, I think, that the best thing to say is stop trying to appease and change something that will never be appeased or changed. It wishes to achieve one objective. If it doesn't do it today, it'll do it tomorrow. If not tomorrow, the day after, but sooner or later, you know. And I say this all the time. You know, he who kisses a cobra on the mouth but expects any other outcome but one is a fool. You know, they tried it with Adolf Hitler, and now they're trying it with these people, and it doesn't work. You know, you can't you can't compromise, you can't accommodate evil in your midst and expect good outcome. It doesn't happen that way.
Absolutely. I mean, Darius, we're in this very peculiar situation when it comes to this regime, the Islamic Republic of Iran. According to the International Atomic Energy Agency, the UN's own nuclear watchdog, that last month they said the regime is only weeks away from nuclear breakout, of having enough uranium to enrich to make a nuclear weapon. On the one hand, this is the ultimate goal that the regime has strived for over the last 4 decades.
Right.
But at the same time, there seems to be so much internal dissatisfaction with the regime, whether they've gone through the bird flu crisis, the flooding crisis, whether they've actually gone through the earthquake, which has devastated the country. And of course, this summer has been the hottest on record in Iran, where there are even reports of having that the water could actually, and the reservoirs could actually dry up to the extent that they're warning now that 60% of Iran's population may have to flee Iran because of the mismanagement of the water systems by the mullahs. So are we seeing the beginning of the end of this vile regime? And do you think that the Iranian people, with everything that's going off, have enough strength to stand against this totalitarian regime?
Right. Well, I think the best way to answer your question is the status quo, the current situation in Iran, on its own, even with the people. I mean, God bless them, the Iranian people. 90% of these people oppose the situation. 90%. And I'm saying that with absolute confidence. And they have, and this is nothing new. Okay, you have to understand something. You know, we get the world media tries to give us this impression that the biggest movements was in the Green Movement and 2018 and 19. No, the only reason that these are now become such prominent events is because of social media. Okay, but these movements have been going on since day one. Since this situation, this current situation was imposed upon them, they've been rising up against this system since day one, in 1979. This is nothing new. But like I said, social media, the media, news media can only ignore it so long. Before, they shut everybody up. They wouldn't cover nothing. The world was kept ignorant and blind. But when the social media thing came in, Facebook, etc., the media could no longer keep a lid on it. So now, but instead they reward it. They'll say, oh, the people are protesting. The people are protest. No, these aren't protests. Protest means basically, protest is leaves room for policy implementation, policy reform. It's negotiable. No, what we're seeing, what we saw transpire in 2018, 2019, 2020, and so on. These were people's cry for revolution. And like I said, it has been going on for many, 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 many years. But the world governments turned their blind eye to all these, to people's cries. So basically, back to your question, sorry. On their own, the people, no matter how discontented, no matter how angry, no matter how, they can't change nothing. They won't. I mean, I know there's a lot of groups out there. Oh, we're gonna, no, that's an illusion. They need outside help. Let's put it that way. The Iranian people on their own, until Washington, until Buckingham Palace, or I mean, Parliament.
The Foreign Office,
Westminster, yeah, whatever. Until Paris, until whatever decides to take that step. I don't care how many times people rise up. I don't care what they do. The situation will not change. And the situation will not change until the narrative changes, until we start calling these events, these uprisings, not as protests, but as revolution. Okay, because when you say revolution, that's conclusive. Revolution means that's it. But when you say protest, they're like, oh yeah, there's room for reform. We don't have to change the situation, just remold it, reshape it. See what I mean? So until we change the narrative, until the Iranian people are finally listened to by the international community properly, and nothing's going to change. As far as the nuclear thing goes, oh, absolutely. You can ask any Iranian on the street anywhere in the world, they'll tell you this situation, this current system requires nuclear weapons. They're going to use it. That's it. This isn't just me talking. You can ask any Iranian you like, anywhere in the world. I don't care if he's in Paris, Italy, America, they'll tell you the same thing. If they acquire it, they're going to use it. That's it. But this narrative, again, coming from these Western leaders, which is, peaceful means, or they're selling something, and it sure in the heck ain't. It's not an interest of you or I or the rest of the world, actually.
Yeah. Darius, we're down to a minute left of the program.
Sure.
Do you have a message to our viewers about the need to stand with the Iranian people, to stand with the Christians in Iran who are being persecuted, and also the very vulnerable Jewish community, small Jewish community in Iran that has to live under this totalitarian regime in Iran?
Yes, I think that the people need to start. I think the biggest step, best step, is stop relying on certain Western media outlets to get the proper information and news as to what the Iranian people want, and start turning to the Iranian peoples themselves. And because there are certain elements in the world media, that they actually, like I said, with this narrative, they present this image, for example, of moderate versus hardliner. There is no such thing, and any Iranian will tell you that. And that's another reason why I'm saying turn to the Iranian people, listen to what they're saying, because every Iranian will tell you this. They'll say there's no such thing as a moderate and a hardliner within this system. And you hear a lot of times where you have people coming forward saying we represent the moderate voice within the regime. That we, first of all, in that country, under this system, if you even express if they even have a hint that you show any or harbor, not even necessarily express it, but harbor any discontent towards the status quo, you will either be meeting with the hangman's noose, or you will just outright disappear and never be heard or seen again. There is no such thing as a hard line versus moderate in Iran. In this system, this is it.
Darius, I want to thank you so much for being my guest
welcome.
on this home edition of the Middle East Report, and thank you for telling me and us your incredible and compelling story of how you escaped from Iran. And I just want to thank you for watching at home. It's thanks to brave men like Darius who escaped this vile regime that we can truly know the true nature of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And it should be a warning to all Western leaders what we're actually dealing with. And this regime is a totalitarian regime that suppresses minorities, has the worst record in terms of human rights. They are the #1 sponsor of international terrorism. They support Hamas, Hezbollah, and other radical Islamist terrorist organizations. And they're on the verge of acquiring the world's most dangerous weapon. We should not appease the mullahs in Tehran. So thank you for watching today's home edition of the Middle East Report.